Earlier today, I came across a clip that ended with a sentence that stopped me cold. The speaker said, "Black men have a certain type of intelligence that can't be taught." And then the video ended. Now, without content, a statement like that can be misunderstood. It can sound mystical. It can sound biological. It can even sound divisive. But I don't think that's what was meant. And I think this moment calls for some clarity, not reaction. Because when people are talking about an intelligence that can't be taught, they're usually not talking about genetics at all. They're talking about adaptive intelligence, intelligence shaped by lived conditions. And that's where history matters. For hundreds of years, Black men in America had to navigate systems that were unpredictable, unequal, and often punitive. That environment required a different kind of awareness and ability to read rooms quickly, sense power dynamics, and adjust behaviors in real time, and survive inside a structure that weren't built for fairness. That kind of intelligence isn't learned in a classroom. It's learned through exposure, and this is the same principle behind the elephant tied to a rope. You heard it before. When an elephant is young, the rope is thick and unbreakable. When it grows, the rope becomes thin, but the conditioning remains. The limitation is no longer physical, it's learned. American history created similar conditions. Slavery wasn't just about oppression in the moment. It built systems that shaped access to wealth, education, housing, and opportunity. And those systems don't disappear overnight. They evolve. So when people notice heightened situational awareness, emotional calibrations, or improvisational problem solving in Black men, what they're really seeing isn't something mystical or inherited. They're seeing history living inside behavior, not superiority, not biology, adaptation. And before we react to a statement like that one, it's worth asking a better question. What kind of intelligence do systems create, and at what cost? To make this less abstract, I want to ground it with something personal. My grandmother left me a life insurance policy. On the surface, that might sound like a simple inherited story, but here's the part that often goes unsaid. My grandmother's policy was capped, not by my grandmother's income, not by my grandmother's responsibility, not by my grandmother's ability to pay, but by the color of my grandmother's skin. My grandmother was only legally allowed to purchase a $1,500 policy on my grandmother's life, even though my grandmother could afford much more. Other families were allowed to insure themselves at far higher levels and pass that value forward. That wasn't personal failure. That was the current policy at the time. And that limit didn't just affect my grandmother. It shaped how much financial cushion our family had. It influenced what could be transferred to the next generation. It quietly decided how much margin existed and how much didn't. So when people say nobody alive experienced that, I understand the sentiment, but we may not have experienced the act. We live with the outcome. This is how systems train behavior. When opportunity is capped long enough, Black men learn how to survive without expecting access. Black men learn how to read situations carefully. Black men learn how to adapt, improvise, and protect themselves emotionally and socially. That's not mythology, that's conditioning, like the elephant in the rope. When we step back, my family story isn't unique. It fits into a much larger pattern. Take the GI Bill after World War II. On paper, it was one of the most powerful wealth-building programs in American history. It offered education benefits, low-interest home loans, and pathways into the middle class. And for millions of Americans, it worked exactly that way. But in practice, my friends, many Black veterans, like my dad and my grandfather, were blocked. Not by the federal law itself, but by how it was administered. Local banks denied loans. Local universities limited enrollment. Local policies quietly enforced inclusion. The opportunity existed, but for Black men, access did not. At the same time, redlining mapped inequality directly onto geography. Entire Black neighborhoods were labeled high risk, making home loans for Black families unavailable and investments nearly impossible. Black property values stagnant. Black schools were unfunded. Black families were locked out of equity growth for decades. And there was another layer, one that's often overlooked. In many Black communities, public assistance programs like welfare was structured in a way that discouraged or outright penalized the presence of Black men in the household. In some cases, aid was reduced or denied if a Black man was living in the home. That wasn't just economic pressure. That was behavioral training. Like the elephant, it taught a Black man's family that survival sometimes required his absence. It taught Black men that their presence could cost the household stability, and over time, those rules shape how Black men had to show up or didn't inside their own homes. Again, this wasn't about individual choice in a vacuum. It was about an American system quietly teaching Black men what was allowed, what was risky, and what was necessary to get by in America. This is how advantage compounds, and this is how constraints compound. When one group is allowed to buy houses, build equity, ensure their lives fully, and pass assets forward, those gains stack over generations. When another group is systematically capped, delayed, or denied, the losses stack just as reliable. These systems didn't just shape bank accounts. They shaped expectations. They trained Black men and their families what to anticipate and what not to expect. So when we're talking about adaptive intelligence, heightened awareness, or improvisational skills, we're not talking about cultural mythology. We're talking about what Black men learn when access is uncertain and margins are thin. History didn't just happen and disappear. It organized conditions like the elephant. And those conditions taught behavior. This is why conversations like this matter. When people say that was the past, they're not entirely wrong, but they're not complete either, because history doesn't only live in textbooks. It lives in systems, in access, and in behaviors those systems trained. When you see adaptive intelligence, heightened awareness, or emotional calibrations in Black men, you're not witnessing something mystical or biological. You're seeing the residue of lived conditions, lessons learned in environments where the margins for error were very thin. The danger today isn't acknowledging that reality. The danger is mislabeling it or pretending it appeared out of nowhere. If you want better conversations, better policies, and better outcomes, we have to be honest about how intelligence is shaped, not just celebrated or dismissed. History didn't just happen, it taught, and what it taught is still showing up.